Clint Eastwood was sitting in his trailer on a Hollywood lot when two men in expensive suits walked in without knocking. What they said next made the blood drain from his face, his children's school, his home address, the route his wife drove every morning. Before either man could finish their threat, Clint had opened a drawer, pulled out a loaded .44 Magnum, and pressed it against the forehead of the man doing the talking. Security would later find both men fleeing the lot. Within 48 hours, the FBI was involved. Within a week, one of Hollywood's most powerful producers had vanished forever. It was the autumn of 1977, and Hollywood was a different world. The studio system had crumbled, giving rise to independent producers who operated in the shadows between legitimate business and something far darker. Money flowed from sources nobody asked questions about. Films got made with cash that smelled like cigarette smoke and backroom deals. And if you were a star on the rise, sooner or later, certain people came knocking. Clint Eastwood was 47 years old and sitting on top of the industry. The outlaw Josie Wales had cemented his status as not just an actor, but a director who could deliver hits without studio interference. He had a sprawling property in Carmel, a wife named Maggie, 2 young children, and the kind of quiet life that Hollywood rarely allowed. He drove himself to set. He answered his own phone. He didn't travel with security because he didn't think he needed it. The production he was working on that fall was being partially financed through a company called Tri-State Entertainment, a name that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who understood how certain money moved through the industry. On paper, Tri-State was run by a producer named Vincent Morello, a heavyset man in his 50s with silver rings on every finger and a smile that never reached his eyes. Morello had connections in New York, the kind that came with vowels at the end of names and decades of bodies buried in pine barrens. Clint had met Morello once, briefly, at a production meeting where the man had been introduced as an investor. They'd shaken hands. Morello had commented on how much his daughters loved Clint's westerns. Something about the interaction had made Clint's skin crawl, but he'd dismissed it. Hollywood was full of strange men with too much money. The set that week was running smoothly. Clint had his own trailer at the edge of the lot. Nothing fancy, just a place to run lines and escape the chaos between setups. His routine was predictable. Arrive at 6, shoot until sunset, review dailies, go home to his family. He kept a few personal items in the trailer, including a drawer that most people assumed held scripts and paperwork. It didn't. It held a .44 Magnum revolver, the same model he'd made famous on screen. Clint had learned long ago that the line between movies and reality was thinner than people thought. He was about to learn just how thin. The first sign came 3 days before the trailer confrontation. Clint arrived home after a long shoot to find Maggie sitting at the kitchen table with a strange expression on her face. She was holding a manila envelope that had been left in their mailbox. No postage, no return address, just Eastwood typed across the front. Inside were photographs. His daughter Kimber walking into her elementary school, his son Kyle on the playground, Maggie getting out of her car at the grocery store. Each photo was time-stamped, each one taken within the last 48 hours. There was no note, no explanation, just the images arranged neatly, like a presentation. Clint studied them in silence, his jaw tightening with each photograph. Maggie watched him, waiting for reassurance that didn't come. Finally, she asked, "What is this, Clint? Who would do this?" He didn't answer, but something cold had settled into his chest, a feeling he recognized from the war, from dangerous situations where instinct mattered more than logic. Someone was sending a message, and messages like this only came from people who expected something in return. The next morning, Clint made calls. Quiet ones. He had friends from his early days, stuntmen who'd done time, crew members with connections to people who knew how to find information without asking politely. Within 24 hours, he had a name: Vincent Morello. The production financing wasn't what it seemed. Tristate Entertainment was a front, a laundering operation that cleaned money for East Coast families before recycling it through Hollywood productions. Morello wasn't just an investor, he was a captain in the Gambino organization, and the film Clint was making had become leverage in a larger game. Morello wanted something: creative control, profit percentages, maybe just the prestige of having Clint Eastwood in his pocket. When Clint's agents had pushed back on certain contract terms the previous month, they'd unknowingly triggered a response. Clint told no one what he'd learned. Not his agents, not the studio, not even Maggie. He simply moved the .44 from its case in his bedroom closet to the drawer in his trailer. He started varying his route to set. He made sure Maggie never drove the same way twice to pick up the kids. And he waited. He didn't have to wait long. On October 15th, 1977, two men in Italian suits appeared on the lot, walking past security like they owned the place. They were heading straight for Clint's trailer. The door opened without a knock. Clint was sitting at the small table, reviewing script pages, when two men stepped inside and closed the door behind them. The first was tall and lean, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most crew members made in a month. The second was shorter, thicker, with a neck that seemed to merge directly into his shoulders and hands that had clearly done work that wasn't administrative. The tall one spoke first. His voice was calm, almost friendly, with the faintest trace of a Brooklyn accent smoothed down by years of expensive living. "Mr. Eastwood, Vincent Morello sends his regards. He's disappointed you haven't returned his calls." Clint set down the script pages slowly. "I don't recall getting any calls." "That's the problem, isn't it?" The tall man smiled without warmth. "Communication breakdown. Mr. Morello is a reasonable man. He simply wants to discuss some adjustments to your current arrangement. Profit participation. Creative consultation. Nothing that should trouble a man of your stature." "And if I'm not interested in adjustments?" The shorter man shifted his weight, and for the first time, Clint noticed the bulge beneath his jacket. The message was clear without being spoken. The tall man continued, his tone never changing. "Your daughter Kimber, beautiful girl, 7 years old, yes? PS 118 on Moore Park Street. Gets dropped off at 8:15 every morning. Your wife drives a blue Mercedes, license plate starting with 3NL. Nice house you have in Carmel. Quiet street, not much security." Clint's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. The same stillness that preceded every gunfight he'd ever filmed, only this wasn't a movie. "Mr. Morello wants to be your friend," the tall man said. "Friends look out for each other. Friends make sure nothing bad happens to the people they care about. All he's asking is that you show the same consideration in return. A few points on the back end. A consulting credit for his nephew. Small things. Family things." The shorter man cracked his knuckles, a practice gesture, theatrical in its menace. "You have until Friday to call Mr. Morello directly," the tall man concluded. "After that, he may need to pursue other methods of communication." He turned toward the door. That was his mistake. He had assumed Clint Eastwood was just an actor playing tough. He was about to learn otherwise. Clint's hand moved faster than either man anticipated. The drawer slid open, and the .44 Magnum was out before the tall man's fingers touched the door handle. The click of the hammer pulling back froze both men mid-motion. "Turn around." Slowly. They turned. The shorter man's hand twitched toward his jacket, but Clint was already aiming directly at his chest. "Touch that weapon, and I'll put a hole in you the size of a grapefruit. You know what this gun does. You've seen my movies." The tall man raised his hand slowly, palms out, his composure cracking for the first time. "Mr. Eastwood, let's not do anything we'll regret." "Shut up." Clint rose from his chair, the Magnum never wavering. He crossed the small trailer in 2 steps and pressed the barrel directly against the tall man's forehead. The metal was cold. The man's eyes went wide, all the practiced menace draining from his face, like water from a broken glass. You come into my trailer. You threaten my wife. You threaten my children." Clint's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more danger than any shout could. "I've killed men before. Not on screen. For real. You understand what I'm telling you?" The tall man nodded frantically, sweat beading at his temples. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of this trailer. You're going to get in whatever car brought you here. And you're going to deliver a message to Vincent Morello." Clint pressed the barrel harder, forcing the man's head back. "Tell him if anyone comes near my family again, I won't call the police. I won't call lawyers. I'll come find him myself, and I'll bring this with me." He pulled the gun back and stepped toward the shorter man, who flinched like he'd been struck. Clint reached inside the man's jacket and removed a snub-nosed revolver, tossing it onto the couch. "Now get out." The two men stumbled over each other, getting to the door. The tall man's hand was shaking so badly, he could barely turn the handle. As they spilled out onto the lot, a production assistant 30 yards away looked up in confusion at two well-dressed men practically running toward the parking lot. Clint stood in the doorway of his trailer, the magnum still in his hand, watching them go. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a number he'd hoped he'd never have to use. The FBI arrived within 6 hours. 2 agents in plain suits, one older with gray temples and tired eyes, one younger with the hungry look of someone building a career on dangerous cases. They sat across from Clint in a soundstage office, hastily cleared for privacy, recording equipment clicking softly on the table between them. The older agent, whose name was Harrison, leaned forward with barely concealed excitement. "Mr. Eastwood, do you understand what you've just handed us? Vincent Morello has been untouchable for 15 years. We've never had anyone willing to testify about direct threats." Clint's expression remained granite. "I'm not interested in testifying. I'm interested in making sure my family stays alive. We can offer protection. Your protection is what got us here." Clint's voice cut like a blade. "Your agencies have been watching Morello for years while he sinks his teeth into every studio in this town. You want my help? Fine. But we do this my way." What happened over the next 72 hours would later be described in sealed FBI documents that remained classified for decades. Clint agreed to wear a wire for one meeting, just one, with Morello himself. Against every piece of advice, against the desperate objections of the agents and his own attorneys, he insisted on facing the man personally. The meeting took place in a private dining room at an Italian restaurant in West Hollywood. Morello arrived with 4 bodyguards, his silver rings glinting under dim lighting, his smile as dead as ever. He clearly expected a broken man coming to negotiate surrender. What he got was Clint Eastwood sliding into the booth across from him, looking him dead in the eyes and saying, "I hear you've been taking an interest in my family." The conversation that followed lasted 18 minutes. Morello, brimming with arrogance, laid out exactly what he wanted. Points on 4 productions, a producing credit, access to studio executives. He mentioned the photographs. He mentioned the school. He mentioned, with a small laugh, how tragic accidents could happen to anyone. Every word was captured on the wire taped beneath Clint's shirt. When Clint stood to leave, Morello grabbed his wrist. "We have an understanding." Clint looked down at the hand gripping him, then back up at Morello's face. "Yeah, Vincent, we have an understanding." He walked out of the restaurant without looking back. 48 hours later, FBI agents arrested Vincent Morello at his Long Island estate on 17 counts of racketeering and extortion. The trial never happened. 3 weeks after his arrest, Vincent Morello was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center. Official cause listed as heart failure, though rumors of a more deliberate ending circulated through organized crime circles for years. His organization, exposed by the evidence Clint had helped gather, crumbled within months. Tri-State Entertainment dissolved overnight. 14 associates were indicted. The money pipeline between the East Coast families and Hollywood dried up almost completely. Clint never spoke about what happened. Not to the press, not to colleagues, not even to close friends. The FBI sealed the records. The studio buried the production connection. As far as the public knew, Vincent Morello was just another mobster who met an unremarkable end. No Hollywood connection, no famous actor, no .44 Magnum pressed against anyone's forehead. But the ripples spread in ways that couldn't be hidden from those who knew where to look. Security on film sets changed almost overnight. Studios began vetting financing sources with a scrutiny that hadn't existed before. And certain names, producers, investors, consultants, quietly disappeared from the industry, sensing that the old rules no longer applied. Clint moved his family to a more secure property within the year. He hired private security for the first time in his life. Men with military backgrounds who understood threats that ordinary bodyguards couldn't comprehend. Maggie never learned the full story. He told her only that he'd handled it, that they were safe now, and that some things were better left in the past. The .44 Magnum went back into its case, but it never went back into the closet. From that day forward, it stayed within arm's reach, in his trailer, in his office, in his home. A reminder that the line between playing a tough guy and being one wasn't as wide as Hollywood wanted people to believe. Years later, a retired FBI agent named Harrison gave an interview about organized crime in the entertainment industry. When asked about the turning point, the moment when the mob's grip on Hollywood began to weaken, he paused for a long time before answering. "There was one man," he said carefully, "who refused to be intimidated. A man who was willing to risk everything, his career, his safety, his family, to do what was right. I can't name him, but I can tell you this. He wasn't acting." The interviewer pressed for details. Harrison simply smiled and shook his head. "Some stories are better left as legends.